What if all folklore was real and existing in the modern day and causing trouble here and now?
There are tales of rogues and whores, of stratagems and wars. There's a tale for every season of the year. There are tales of knights and queens, of drudgery and dreams. There's a tale for everybody here. There are stories galore, in volumes by the score, on every subject throughout history. It's all waiting in Pandora's library.
Welcome to Pandora's Library, a new monthly podcast about books that feature the mysterious, fantastical, dark, and creepy elements of life. I'll be interviewing authors who write fantasy, paranormal, horror, crime, and folklore. Anything a little unusual and outside the realms of normal life. It's available as an audio podcast and as a visual podcast. My name is Karen Hamilton Vile. I'm a paranormal murder mystery author of a series of books about a medium who solves crimes with the aid of the ghost she lives with. Every month I'll be interviewing a new author, so if you feel your writing falls into one of these genres, please do get in touch. You can find me on most social media platforms, including Facebook, Instagram, and TikTok. The first author I'm interviewing is my friend Helen. Helen JR Bruce is an author and folklorist living on the magical Somerset Levels. She has 2 books published in a fantasy folklore trilogy set on Dartmoor. She previously edited Witch magazine and is currently editor of Dartmoor Matters magazine. Her work is an exploration of the layers of story embedded in the landscape, and she enjoys facilitating workshops and walks to help people strengthen their connection with the land through story. Previously, she has spoken at the Mercian Gathering, the Burning Woman Festival, the Green Scythe Fair, the Blackshack Festival, and England's Medieval Festival, and she's currently working on a standalone book exploring grief-free folklore. Helen, welcome to the podcast. Lovely to have you here.
Hello, Karen. It's such a pleasure. Thank you so much for having me on the podcast today.
You're welcome. So, your 2 novels, Heat of the Hunt and Lie of the Land, are folkloric fantasy set in the modern world. Can you tell us what the books are about?
That's a lovely broad question to start with. The books are really about loads of the everyday things that we have to deal with, in all honesty. They're about friendship, they're about relationships, they're about finding who on earth you are in a challenging world, in a challenging time. But just to aid that exploration, I've thrown in the concept, what if all folklore was real and existing in the modern day and causing trouble here and now? So it's very much relatable in the way that we're exploring friendship dynamics and working through grief and loss and moving through life with the various challenges we all face. But then there's also the murderous wild hunt, black dogs, necromancers, and undead World War II soldiers just thrown in.
What more could you want?
Everything. It's got it all.
So I found this lovely review on Amazon for your first book, Heat of the Hunt. A well-crafted read which mixes folklore and reality in a rich, deep story, the plot of which twists and turns like the branches of a Dartmoor oak. Quite dark in places, but broken up by light, amusing rays of sunshine, which echoes the wild Dartmoor weather. I think that's a really beautiful review.
I've had some really lovely reviews. You'll know this yourself. As an author, we put so much of our energy and our lives and our time into creating what we write. And for people to take the time to read it is, a big deal in itself. Mm-hmm. But for people to then take the time to sit down and write a review, as you say, it means so much.
I've read both your books. I've got the old covers, so you've got the new covers, haven't you? You made these ones yourself?
So those ones are watercolors that I did. I loved doing. And this is the new cover for the second edition of He of the Hunt. And I'm unsure. I love my painting version. And that's
I love them. I think that's probably more commercial what you've got there, isn't it? That people might find that.
I thought, this is me trying to be more commercial, and this is, a modern cover. And weirdly, I'm going to tell you all the harsh truth is that all the feedback I've had so far is that everyone prefers the first cover. So
Has it made any difference in book sales though? Have you sold more since you've had the new cover or less or?
no, I don't think it's made any difference. The one thing I
No.
would say, I think this modern cover with the digital art is great for the Kindle edition because I
Right.
think that's a slightly different consumer. So in fact, I love this for the Kindle edition. And I think when I print the third edition, spoiler, probably going to go back to the original cover for the.
Oh, brilliant. Okay. So I have to say, I really do judge a book by a cover myself. So I look at the cover, then I read the blurb, then I look at any cover quotes, then I read the first 2-3 pages, and if I like it, then I buy it. But I always do go by the cover. If it's a boring cover, I won't even pick the book up. So I think with either one, both different types are really lovely.
Thank you. And I'm terrible for that too. I will judge a book by the cover 100%.
What true life experiences inspired you to write these novels?
Loads. I shall not bore you with all of them. But I really genuinely do believe, and I think it comes across in my writing, I think that folklore is so very important and so very relevant in assisting us in making sense of and interpreting how we understand life, how we move through life, how we relate to each other and to the landscape. I feel a lot of call to animist understandings of the land. The land feels very alive to me. And I see story, I see folklore as a liminal space, a middle ground where the landscape and we can communicate. I think that landscapes inspire us. We then shape landscapes,
Mm-hmm.
and then it comes full circle, and the landscape comes back around and influences us again. So spending time out in amazing, mysterious, beautiful landscapes, and of course, especially Dartmoor. The books are mainly set in Dartmoor. We do go to Ireland and London as well. But I've been out on Dartmoor, and even really recently, I was out on Dartmoor and I was doing a walk to the edge of Wistman's Wood.
Oh, the ancient woodland, yeah.
The ancient, it's a rainforest. So it's a temperate rainforest here in England, really rare, amazing habitat. At the time I was writing my books, you could go in, and Wistman's Wood is on the cover of that first edition book that I painted. The advice now is that we go around the edge and we look in, because so many people went to Wistman's Wood during lockdown that the very fragile mosses and lichens started to get worn away.
Mm-hmm.
So it's still very, very beautiful, and you can look in, you walk around it. And quite recently I was walking across the moor to the edge of Wistman's Wood, looping around. And I left it a bit late, which you should never do. Don't go out onto the moor if you're not sure you're going to get back before it's dark. And I was there with my friend Andy, and we got to the woods. We'd had a look in. It was stunning, bright verdant green, these horsehair lichens like hanging from the trees, boulders, gorgeous. But it was getting dark. So we turned around to come back. And it was suddenly really dark. I hadn't realised how dark it had got. And I'm picking my way through these boulders out on the edge of the woods, trying to find sort of the path back across the moor. And as I'm trying to do this, there keeps being these flashes of light from behind me, like so bright. They ruin my night vision. They're really disorientating.
Wow.
And I go along for some time and, flash, and I keep, stumbling about, completely suddenly struggling to work out where I am or where I'm going. And I presume, I'm getting quite cross, that Andy's taking pictures. I'm presuming it's a flash on his phone. Either he's using it as a flashlight in a really weird way, or that he's just taking pictures of my back. And I turn around, I'm so confused. I'm like, Andy, stop with the phone. You're ruining my night vision. I can't see a thing. And he looks at me and he's looking down at his phone. He's like, I'm not doing anything with my phone. I'm not taking pictures. So I'm asking, where on earth does the flashing come from? It's so disorientating. I'm going to get completely lost. At which point I remember about the pixies. I remember about will-o'-the-wisp and corpse candles and everything on the moor that can confuse you and lead you into a bog. And
so did Andy see the lights, or was it just you? Or
it was just me.
Oh.
They were after me. So nothing to do with his phone. I did find my way back to the path and I was absolutely fine. But I've no explanation for this bright light that kept happening. So folklore feels as good an explanation as any.
And that's not the only strange experiences you've had, isn't there, with black dogs as well when you were younger? And
no, I've been blessed to have a strange life, which is a great thing, I think. Growing up as a child, as you say, and we've spoken about this, I often saw this black dog, and one of my strongest memories as a young child coming towards teenage years is waking up in the night with what I believe now maybe was a type of sleep paralysis, and being able to move my head or move my eyes enough to look at my doorway coming into my room. And there, the silhouette sitting in the doorway is this enormous black dog. Think, like an Alsatian type, pointy ears, just sitting on the threshold of my door. And it took me a long time to stop being absolutely terrified of this dog. And then over the years, this figure became a companion that appeared sort of by my side in my life during tough times. And the black dog became quite a comfort, actually, which is why I've gone on to write a lot and talk a lot about the duality of black dog folklore, how the dog is so often, a hellhound and an omen of death. But simultaneously, there's so many stories where the black dog is a psychopomp and a soul guide and a guardian. And I think, we need to know this information because all of us probably have encountered something a bit strange in our lives, and to have some context there around it, to process it, to know some folklore, to know some stories, that can only be helpful.
I think the interesting thing about being an author who writes about the unusual, so in my case, the paranormal, is that when you meet people that are buying your book, they often, you can see they want to tell you something because they've had some little experience themselves, and it gives them a way to open up and talk about the things that they've experienced. So have you ever had anybody tell you about any odd experiences like that?
Many people. I think another wonderful facet of what we do, what we both do, writing about these things, we give permission, I think, to people to share their own stories, which is amazing. Very often when I've given talks about folklore, and probably most often when I speak about black dog folklore, because this black dog archetype is so universal. It's common all across Britain. We have so many, we barely move for black dogs in Britain, but in other countries as well, in America, in Mexico, it's not tied to, one place or one time. This black dog archetype has so much meaning across the world, and people will have their own stories, and they'll say, I saw this dog and I watched it for a little time and it disappeared. Or probably one that really stuck with me, I'd been explaining to a group about the concept of the church grim, how it's believed in folkloric practice, in a new churchyard, a black dog would be buried in the northernmost part to become the church grim or the guardian. And from my understanding, that means there's not one church grim. There could be hundreds of church grims all across the country looking after their patch, their graveyard. And someone listened to my talk about this, and they came up at the end and they explained about how there was this strange patch of land near them that they felt had been subject to some kind of loss. Like a building, some other things had been there that had been knocked down, and there was like this desolate area that they seemed to feel held some kind of negative memories, bad memories of loss. And they said they'd seen this figure of a dog on and off in this space that had come and gone. And they said, I wonder whether church grims don't just have to be in, rural churchyards out in the countryside. I wonder whether you can get a grim for a patch of urban land.
Yeah.
And I thought, why not? And it wasn't long after that I read a theory that literally made me cry about the dog that was put out into space. Do not condone this behaviour. And the dog was put out into space and died out in space as part of the experiment before they sent people, which is horrible. And why do humans do this? But then someone had shared that story as a comic, but they'd explained it in the context of this dog now being the grim of space, and all the people and other lives that have gone on to be lost in space have their grim. And of course it's a dog.
Oh, fantastic. So this was a question from one of my friends. How do you decide which characters are going to be the main characters and which are side characters?
You probably have so much experience with this. Characters are so demanding. Do you have a demanding character?
Yeah, I've had characters that have woken me up in the night and demanded that I write them down before I go back to sleep, and I just had to get them out on paper because they just were so fully formed. And sometimes they decide they're going to go that way, and you were thinking they were going to go that way. And yeah.
So true. I'm here to confess, I have almost zero control over my characters. I think there's a concept, maybe, and maybe for some people this is true, that writers sit down and they meticulously plan a character. And sometimes that does happen at the start. You create the skeleton of a character, but as soon as they exist, they grow their own set of ideas and plans. And as you say, sometimes they appear literally fully formed. So probably the best example of this is Clara, my character in the second book, who's a middle-aged witch, assistant at a school, discovered this book on, teenage witchcraft really late, keeps it in her bra, and her enthusiasm, is off the scale. She's brilliant. Not that adept at anything, but brilliant. And she came into the book as a throwaway character who was going to be murdered by my villain. Sorry, Clara. And so we had my villain, Squire Cabell, the murderous dark huntsman, rock up and meet Clara, the middle-aged, not very good at witchcraft witch. And he was like, she's a witch. I'm not killing a witch. Sorry. No. He wouldn't kill her. And she was not having any of being gone either. So she had a firm foothold in the story. And she's back later on in the book then, summoning Squire Cabell back with a piece of, slightly gone off meat she found in the fridge. I've lost all control of Clara. She's planning her own side series. She's long gone. So I think you maybe do plan the very main characters. So I've got Adrian and I've got Gemma, and they're very much based on an amalgamation of lots of people I know really well, and probably on my younger self to some extent. But I think some of your side characters, you just never know.
No.
A character can come in and you think they're going to pop in for a bit and then go. And sometimes actually they've got their foot in their door and they're there to stay and take over.
Yeah, a lot of my characters I never intended at the beginning. I mean, the main characters like Ada, the ghosts, David Matlock, the inspector, but other ones just popped in.
Barged in.
And on a similar vein, do the characters ever change their purpose as you write the book? This comes from me because in my first book and my second book, the murderer was different when I planned it than at the end of the book when I finished it. So it completely changed because I thought, that'd be much better. But is that anything that happens to you?
Definitely. I think characters do evolve. And as you get to know these characters better and better and you get into their head, you can get to a point you try to make them do something that you planned for the story. And you realise they're absolutely not ever going to do that. I think one of my interesting examples of that, I have a World War II German soldier, Franz, who is undead.
Oh, I love him. He's my favourite character, I think.
And you think, what a really weird character to throw into a folkloric book. But it's based on the fact that I discovered there's all of these World War II planes on Dartmoor. And you can go and find the wreckage of some of them still. They're preserved in the peat, which is insane. And many pilots, both American, British, German, finding themselves disorientated, not maybe where they planned, ended up over Dartmoor. And it was a great place to get rid of bombs, or if you were going to have to go down somewhere, if your plane was not in perfect condition, you've got this massive green expanse. So somehow loads of planes are on Dartmoor. So I wanted to capture this part of the folklore in the story, hence I have this character accidentally getting raised up out the bog with his plane. And I wanted to really delve into, war and the ethics of war, and trying to do the right thing for your country and following a culture, but then suddenly being completely wound up in what you thought was doing the right thing, many, many years ago, waking up in a completely different cultural time, seeing your life as history, and reassessing your beliefs completely. So a German soldier suddenly in the world now, I was not prepared for the amount of grief and anger I had to work through with this character, and loss and rage even at how we haven't learnt the lessons in the world now. So what I thought was, an interesting character to convey this sort of slightly lesser known element of folklore of the moor with all of these plane crashes, has evolved into this really dynamic character with some really strong opinions about very big topics that I now am going to have to allow him to deliver to the world.
So where do you find inspiration for characters' names and places? Sometimes I just see something next to me in the room and I take it off that. I took one off a marmalade jar once. for David Matlock, who was made in Matlock, Derbyshire, so that's where his name came from. Do you do something similar, or where does the inspiration come from?
So one of the things that's super important for me, and I'm always trying to do, and especially in the trilogy, is really collide reality and story. So all of the places are real. All of the locations, if people go to a pub, if they go anywhere, it's all a real place you can visit. So I didn't need to make up any of that. Some of the names I have made up, especially for the Fae characters, because through a name you want to convey they're not human, they're not different, so they're not going to have a standard human name. And one of the Fae characters is called Fian, and that was the name inside of a roll of tape that was in my computer.
Fantastic.
What on earth, Fian? What kind of brand of tape is that? So I
Sounds
don't know.
Anglo-Saxon or something.
Yeah, it's a brilliant name. But that was inside the roll of tape. And then we have another not so nice Fae character. We have Astera, who is rather unpleasant. We don't want to cross her. But her name, you're going to laugh. Oh my gosh, sorry, I'm ruining my book here. I wrote a Fae murder mystery many, many, many years ago when I was like a teenager. And it was like a comedy one. So we gave all the characters similar names, like funny tweaks on known words. So we had Ass Terror, a terrifying ass, who was one of the characters. But actually, if you say it quickly, it's quite a cool name. So it became Astera. But regrettably for her, the origin of her name is Ass Terror.
And what research have you undertaken for your books?
Most of my life at this point. Living is such great research, can I just say? What was that saying? You have to live a whole year at least to condense that into a book.
Yeah.
That's so true. And sometimes it's more than a year. You just need to experience. I honestly class everything as research. I think it's so true. Going out and having a cream tea in the sun is research. Because you just never know when you're going to see someone or see a mannerism or just overhear something that's suddenly so important. But, specific folkloric research, I think ever since I went on a school trip to Grimspound with school, back in senior school, I've been really obsessed with Dartmoor. And when I started writing, I started going and visiting these places, visiting these stone circles, visiting the tours, visiting, the towns, and getting to know these stories and get to know these places. So I'm probably over 15 years visiting Dartmoor, learning about Dartmoor, wanting to go to the exact places, touch the sacred ground where these stories are linked to. And I don't see any sign of it ending. I think Dartmoor I could visit for my whole life and not have seen every single bit. And research for writing, is ongoing. I can't wait to overhear or see the next little snippet that just slots it in. I gathered actually an activity for the standalone book I'm writing about grief and folklore. And I needed a woman to be doing an activity in the woods by these ancient beech trees. And I didn't know quite what she was going to be doing. And then in my job with the Dartmoor Preservation Association, I ended up working with some people who are seed collecting from veteran trees in the forest to grow these seeds into native trees to help replant the forests. Wow. And I was like, of course, she's going to be collecting seeds. I would never have thought of that. It's quite a niche thing, but it's got so much meaning, so much symbolic meaning around collecting these seeds that really ties in with some other themes. So I was just so grateful to collect that, and I've slotted it in my my box of things to use.
Or a compost heap. I've heard it called before.
Compost heap. Yeah.
Mix them all together and
So
comes
then
out as something new. So tell us about your favourite character in your novels and why you like them so much.
it's really hard to pick a favourite. Karen, could you pick a favourite?
I quite like Inspector Jolly. I won't say any more about that. And one of my other characters in my first book I really loved, although he's the one that's got least comment from everybody. Everybody else seems to like the ghosts, but yeah, I sort of have little favourites. Yeah.
It's hard to pick one. I agree. I love your ghosts. I love Poltergeist. We mustn't have favourites though, must we? I think a lot about one of my characters called Mike or Michael.
Oh yes, yeah.
Has a huge arc and will have an even bigger arc in the third book, going from an alcoholic in the local pub telling stories to people who listen, ending wrapped up in this quest to work out, what's going on with these strange things happening in Dartmoor, and helping Gemma then find Adrian when he goes missing, to then find out that he's Fae, he's related to Gabriel, Master of the Wild Hunt, he's had his memory erased, and then suddenly thrown into a world that he once knew, and somehow having to find a footing in two worlds, having two sets of memories as a human and his set of Fae memories. And he's got more to come in the third book, which will be even more challenging for him. But the extra layer to this character is that he's based on a real person. Shouldn't really do that. It's a bit naughty. But he's based on Michael Whitley, who was in the newspaper talking about a sighting of the beast of Dartmoor. And he describes seeing the beast at Hound Tor and how it moved unnaturally, unlike anything he'd ever seen. And Michael Whitley still works on Dartmoor, and he flies hawks, and he has ex-racehorses that he retrains. And in the books, Michael has hawks. And I was really lucky. I got to choose, as part of my treatment around my holistic treatment around my chemotherapy, I got to choose a special day out. And I could choose anything. So I chose to go and do fly hawks on horseback on Dartmoor with none other than Michael Whitley. So I have met the real Michael, who my character Mike is sort of very vaguely based on. And I told the real Michael what I'd done and about the version of him in my book. And I gave him the book. And he was absolutely fine with it. So I love Michael because he kind of exists, sort of.
Amazing. Are there any secrets hidden in your books that only those in the know will find?
Such a great question. When I read the lovely questions you sent me, I thought, that is a great question. There's kind of loads. I am terrible for, when you're at school and you analyse a text and you're like, they've chosen the colour blue because this symbolises melancholy, and I do that. Every single thing I will pick. If there's like a number on a door, I'll pick a number that has certain symbolism. Any single thing in the book, or even the birds that people might hear singing at a certain time, there'll be a folklore attached to that bird that has meaning to the moment. So any little thing is kind of an Easter egg that you can look into more.
I love that.
Yeah, I wonder if anyone has ever Well, maybe one day in the far future, when my books are in the school curriculum and people have to analyse them for their exam, it's going to be really rich territory for people to to say, well, they saw a blackbird, and this is symbolic of, the quest in Irish mythology to reunite families. They can really go on for one. And if I'm still alive, I can be like, yeah, that is what I meant, 100%.
Okay, so you're stuck in a lift with two of your favourite writers. Who are they? So it can be anyone alive or dead. And what would you ask them?
They're both like quite dead, sadly. So it'd be a bit of a spooky lift ride, but that's okay. I feel fine about that. So it would have to be J.R.R. Tolkien. Obviously, he's epic. And I wanted to have in my author name my J.R. in the middle, because I was like, so close to J.R.R. Just that, one R off. I'm only one R off. R. Tolkien. So I would love to speak to him about his world building, about his real attention to mythology, and his really powerful desire to re-mythologize Britain. He felt that, our mythology had become depleted. So I feel he must have shared a bit of a similar idea to me about how important folklore and myth is for identity and for cultures. So
There's been a big uptake, hasn't there, recently, in people's interest in folklore on social media. I've seen a lot more interest in it lately.
It's a whole movement. And in my works, I work for a charity, and folklore and activism and environmentalism, using these folkloric figures as a rallying point, is a huge thing. Using the figure of Old Crochan on Dartmoor in some of the big protests over access rights to the moor. So he'd probably love it, actually. He'd be ready to join in with that. And then, of course, Terry Pratchett. Absolutely love him. So inspired by his work, his satire and his humour, how he makes folklore, not just something to enjoy, it's thrilling, it's dark, love all of that, but it also conveys these really important messages about the world now, and people, and how we should treat people. Great quote from him, from one of the witches, adore. I just so wish that my witch Clara could meet with, Magrat, Granny Weatherwax. It'd be what a party. But one of the quotes, from him, and it's something along the lines of, trouble begins when we start to treat people as things. And there's a lot to be taken from that.
Yeah. Okay. How do you write? Are you a pantser? Do you plan every detail meticulously, or are you somewhere in the middle?
I'm somewhere in the middle. Now, what do? You've admitted to me that you do a little bit of pantsering sometimes. Is that true?
I do. I have a little bit of a spiel, about a paragraph for each chapter, and then I start writing, and I mostly forget a lot of that anyway, and characters tell me what they want to do. So a little bit of planning, but not a lot. Mostly by the seat of my pants.
Love that.
And I think sometimes the best ideas for me come that way.
Organically, because they're informed by the characters. And I think that's how you end up with very believable characters, if you do let a story be character driven. I really do think that's true. I think I work in a reasonably similar way. So I will have an overall plan. I'll have an overall, arc for the book. I'll know where I need to get to. I'll know the main events. And sort of, I'll know at least the key event in each chapter. And then alongside that, I will tend to create a character arc for each individual character. I think, as I said, it's very much character driven. So I've got the big events in the book, but actually probably the main driver of the story sort of around those key things is the journey that I know each of these characters need to go on. And that will tend to, as you say, fill in around these main events that we've popped in for the book and for the chapters.
And what motivates you to write? I know whenever I speak to people buy my book, they're like, how do you do it? How can you think these things up in your brain? And why did you start writing? So it's a kind of a release for me to do it. I think that's how it started for me.
I think sometimes you don't choose to be a writer. I always wanted to be a writer ever since I was really, really young, and I would write my own little books, A4 paper folded in half, and I'd illustrate it. I wrote some really weird books. I think one was about someone who'd been cursed to become a sailing boat.
Sailing boat? Wow.
Yeah. And then some people had to use the sailing boat in a storm. I think the boat somehow helped them, but then it was sad because the mast snapped and then it started to bleed because it was a person. Don't remember what happened after that. But always a weird story, always a bit dark. I think if the stories are in you, you just have to let them out. I sometimes have absolutely no control, and I'm almost watching it like a film in my head, and I'm literally just scampering away trying to write it down.
Are you a bit of a daydreamer, or are you?
Definitely.
Yeah.
Definitely.
I do wonder if daydreamers are the sort of people that become writers, or maybe that's not true for everybody. Certainly is in my case.
I think when I used to drive the bus, why am I admitting all of these things in public? When I used to drive the bus and it was really quiet, and I'd be driving, for a couple of hours to like Bristol and back. And it's a long time to think. You can't have a radio or anything on, and you're watching the road, but you know the road really well. So I would really regularly find myself coming up with little stories as I was traveling.
You had a ghostly experience, didn't you, one time when you're driving your bus?
I did. And I often tell people the story kind of to combat this idea that ghosts always are spooky and appear in the dark and in a churchyard at night.
Yeah.
I feel this was really remarkable because it was 10 o'clock in the morning on a bright day, and I'd driven the bus from Wells to Street, via Glastonbury to Street, and then the route ends in, this random just housing area in the street. So I go past the main stop at the library in the street. Most people get off there. And then I go round and I stop, and I have maybe 10 minutes to wait in this just residential area. And sometimes, one or two people will want to go to their house there, so that's fine, and they'll stay on till the very end. And on this day, I'm watching, because I have a video camera in the cab, so I can watch the top deck. And I'm watching people get off, and I see that I've got one passenger still upstairs, an older gentleman in a flat cap, and he's sitting in the seat directly behind the stairs. So it's on the right side at the top of the bus. And as I pull into my final stop, where I'm going to wait for 10 minutes, I see that he's still sat there. And I turn off the engine, turn everything off, which means the camera goes off. And I wait for him to come down and go outdoor. And a couple of minutes passes and he hasn't come out. Now, this isn't, impossible, because sometimes if people don't want to wait out in the cold, they get on at the library in Street, they wait out the 10 minutes, ready to do the loop back into Bristol. So I think this is what he's doing. And as a courtesy, just to make sure that's what he wants, I decide I'm going to go upstairs and just say, we'll be going again in 5-10 minutes, and I'll be heading back to Wales and then on to Bristol. So I go upstairs, ready to find this man just to tell him, and I don't see him in his seat, and I think, maybe he's moved, he's gone and sat in the back seat. I go all the way down, I look everywhere. This man is completely gone. There is no man there. So he did not come out the door. It's not one of those buses with 2 doors. There's only one door, that's next to me in the cab. And it's not, I just saw him for a second. It's not like he looked ghostly or see-through. And I saw him through technology. I saw him through the camera. But there was no man upstairs.
Right. Fantastic. Okay, moving away from ghostly things. How do you approach editing and revising your work? Because you work very differently to me, don't you?
So editing and revising is like 80% or more, I think, of writing a book. And I've been really blessed, actually. I've done author mentoring for various people. I've worked with a lovely lady called Lisa, writing a book about child loss over the last year, and that's just come out. And I worked with her through the whole process. And the amount of time you spend, it was interesting to kind of see it from a step outside where it's not my work. But yes, you create your first draft, really exciting. You've got your ideas, you create your draft, it's written down. And then, you read through, make sure you've made no typos, of course. You make sure, the sentences make sense, all of that. Brilliant. And then you read through, and this is me, I don't know, I go deep. I'll read each sentence and I'll be like, do I like the rhythm of the sentence? Does the rhythm of the sentence work with the others? Does the rhythm of the sentence flow with the whole page? Does it sound beautiful? Does it look beautiful? Does it convey exactly what I mean? So I'm so terribly meticulous on like a word level. I will tend to write my word quota for the day. If I write 400 words in a day, I'm really happy with that. This is a cat. If I write 400 words in a day, that's brilliant. And what I'll tend to do the next day, I'll begin by reading through that 400 words, editing it, and then writing my next 400. So every single piece, actually, to get through the book would have been edited maybe 100 times.
Right.
By the time I get to the end, because I've edited every single day, every stage, I don't tend to have to make very big changes.
Yeah, I'm the other way around. I'm trying to learn to be a bit more like you, because I think it makes it less of a chore at the end that you've got this massive amount to do. So I'm trying to edit a bit more now as I go along. So your books have humour laced throughout them. Do you think it's important to include humour in writing?
Do you think it's important to include cats in it?
Cats, definitely.
I think humour is such an important tool, actually, and probably isn't appropriate for every single book. And there are subjects that are just not humorous.
Yeah.
Ever. But what I tend to find, because I look at not only the content in the story, but I look at the rhythm and flow, I will pick up, if I feel the topic's been very dark, if we've had like a chapter, it's very intense, very dark, I think in order to create movement and contrast and not get stagnant in the storytelling, you need to then do a shift. And there can be a really high energy if you purposefully shift from something very, very serious, but serious to the point that it becomes silly. Like, I'm very wary of, really, really high fantasy. I love it. I do love it. But if I'm honest, some of it with its wording and it's just high drama, it's so easy to tread into silly territory. So for an effect, I'm happy to have people kind of step into that momentarily. They're so serious, they're so dark, it's so intense. And then someone will make a really stupid comment and just lighten the mood. And it stops. Somehow that keeps it very human. We can relate to that rather than trying to ask a reader to stay in this constant, very serious, high stakes. But there's like monstrous dogs and undead people, but it's very serious. So I use humour definitely as a tool to keep flow happening and to keep it relatable, because life is ridiculous and sad and funny all in one mixed big bag. And I think that's real.
I think British humour in particular is very black humour sometimes, isn't it? Something I've read, going back in books, going back, at least 100 years, this very dark sense of humour sometimes in British books and things.
Do you enjoy a dark sense of humour? There's something very poetic, I guess, sometimes. There's something almost humorous in, even if things are terribly dark, but it's someone getting their just desserts, and kind of the way they get their just desserts can be dark and a bit funny at the same time.
You're a self-published author, and what advice would you give to other authors out there who might be thinking of publishing their first book?
I think you just have to go for it. That's just basic advice. It's easy to say though, isn't it? It's easy to say, just go for it. I think really look at your book, look inside yourself. If you feel strongly this story is important and this story needs to be out there, you absolutely need to do whatever it takes to get it out there. So if you're going down the self-published route, and there's been a real shift, I think when I went to uni, which was many years ago now for my degree, it was kind of frowned upon, traditional publishing was the only legitimate way, and self-publishing was for if you didn't make the grade. I think that was, the undercurrent. And I think that's really, really shifted now, and many excellent authors are self-publishing simply because the traditional publishing industry is so saturated, but also it's a big commercial thing. So the likelihood of a well-known author who is very commercially popular being published, even though they've got 10 books already out, the likelihood of them being chosen over a newer author, even if their writing is amazing but unknown. I think big companies that want to make money, totally understandably, they go for the safe bet sometimes. And there are smaller presses that are really different, and that isn't how they work. But still, there's so much competition, and getting an agent and, finding someone to connect with and someone who really loves your story takes a long time. And then them finding a publisher. And then, of course, when you go down the traditional publishing route, there's always the chance that they go, okay, we mostly like this story, but actually I want this character like this.
Yeah.
And I want this to change. And I felt very, very strongly with my books. I didn't want it changed. Even though I'd love to make money from writing, I just don't see it for me as a commercial activity. It's not something I'm going to mess around with my characters and my storyline because I'm told it's better to sell it that way. So I guess I very much chose the self-publishing route because I wanted the story intact as I envisioned it. and I wanted it to be out there and accessible, so I'm able to have it on Kindle. People can buy the first book for, $1.99. Really easy to get it and read it. I wanted control of what the cover looked like. And commercial publishing, you might end up with only pennies per book sold, whereas as a self-published author, you might be able to be making, a 30 or 40% markup on what it's cost you to produce the book. So you've got a much higher likelihood, unless, of course, you are an absolute top selling traditionally published author. As a self-published author, then you've just got more control. You've got more likelihood, especially if you're going to go to events and you're going to do talks, to sell your book and actually cover your costs, and maybe, dare I say it, make a tiny bit of money.
Yes, it's not a great way to make money, is it, as a self-published author? Unless, like you say, you're one of those lucky ones that really manages to push through somehow.
And that is going to be us, Karen. Give it 3 years, I'd say.
I'd love it to be, yeah, brilliant. So what's the most rewarding feedback you've received about your books? I think we may have covered that a little bit, but
someone said to me that after reading the books, they'd never see Dartmoor in the same way ever again. I think that's a good thing.
Yes.
I think that's a good thing. I think that's probably what you want to do with your story. When you write a book and you share it with the world, you hope that maybe they take something from that that's of use to them, and maybe allows them to grow, to change in the way that they then see and interact with the world. So if I opened that person's eyes to seeing the stories that are layered on the landscape as part of the map, then my work here is done.
You have a degree in and an MA in writing. Do you think these are essential for writers to publish a book? How have they helped you with your writing?
I don't think they're essential, but I do think they're very helpful. So the lovely Lisa, who I worked with, has not got any of those things. And with a mentor and an editor, she has written and self-published her book. Brilliant. I think books take a team of people, actually. It is never, ever just the one person. So as long as you've got the expertise within your team, I think you're absolutely fine. I don't think every single person involved needs to have qualifications up to their eyeballs. I do think that going and getting a degree and then gaining the master's, it does teach you the real nitty-gritty intricacies of building a book. I don't think it teaches you how to get inspired. I think that's probably quite an organic thing. And I don't think you even know how to write a word. You don't have to be able to read or write to have the most amazing story in your head. But I think the teaching around that helps to ground those ideas. I think it helps build resilience in editing, resilience in being told something doesn't work, having to redo, having to kill your darlings, they call it. So a bit you love so much, or a character you love so much, but actually they're not working in the book as a whole. So I think the resilience and the structure and teaching you to to be quite strict with yourself and, set time to write and set time to edit. They're the really key, really, really key things I brought from it. And probably actually being in a group with other authors and giving each other feedback and learning how to look at something, to take a step back and look at your own writing in a critical yet positive way is really, really helpful. But if you've got, great friends around you who can help you with proofreading, if you've got an editor, if you've got a mentor as an author, and you're all working together, then you're covering all those bases.
I think one of the things that because you helped me with some of the chapters in my book, one of the things that I really liked that you sort of told me was I had a paramedic, and he was a bit of a flat character. I was just, he's just in and out in the scene. And you said, well, think about him as a person. What's his story? Why is he doing this? And then suddenly I put in these extra nuances of his character. So like he had a tattoo which suggested he'd been an army medic. He had I think his wedding ring finger was missing, things like that. And it suddenly I really wanted him to be a bigger character and have a bigger part, because I was suddenly liking him more. And obviously hopefully that will make him more likable to the readers and make them connect to him more, even though he's just a little tiny character. So I think it's probably taught you lots of good things like that as well. Did that come from your training, or is that something that you thought up yourself?
I think definitely that was covered in, the various classes I've taken. And something really useful, actually, that I carry with me, and it's a game-changing thing, linked to what you just said, is every single character, even these tiny characters, create them, have their backstory, know them as a character, and actually the amount of energy and believability and power that is injected into your story by having all of this backstory, which is never explicitly mentioned, is just incredible. It somehow just holds the energy for this character, and you might never explicitly put down in words all of this story you've created for this character, but somehow just in their appearance and in the mannerisms you give them and in the way they interact, it influences that and informs that in a way that just brings them to life.
I think as well you suggested using words that fit, descriptors that fit those characters, the words that they would use to describe something. So the character, I think he was a mechanic in my book, so I said he proposes to his girlfriend, and he says that they fit together like a nut and bolt, because I was thinking, well, that's what he would think, because that's what he works with. He works with, engineering type stuff. So I think that was something really helpful you taught me as well.
I'm so glad you found that useful, and I think that's perfect. Thinking about how would that character speak, and then allowing the character to inform you because you know them. Well, this is how I'd express it, of course.
So, do you know when we can expect the third book in the trilogy to be published? What stage is it at now?
Dear listeners, readers, fans and allies. So I've taken, Karen, I can admit this, I've taken probably a year's break now for my own writing, because I did my master's, and the book I was working on for that is this really amazing book that I cannot wait to bring to you all, about the grief of losing a parent explored through folklore. And that's half done. And then just over a year ago, my mum died unexpectedly. And suddenly I could not write about grief in folklore for a little while. And in fact, I couldn't write at all. I have been writing with other people, been working with Lisa. I've been writing articles. I was still editing Witch magazine in that time. I've been writing loads of online articles for Dartmoor Matters. But somehow my books that are so much part of me and so personal, the grief has been too big. But I see this lovely interview with you today, and I was having conversations yesterday actually about my book. So I think, Karen, we're on the cusp of returning to the writing.
Fantastic.
So
I know John Gwynne, the author, he lost his daughter a while back, and he had to take a while out because he couldn't write at all. You've got to look after yourself first, haven't you? And the writing sort of has to come second for a while. But where can people buy your books? What sort of places? Are you going to any fairs or anything?
So I will be hoping to stock some more places in Dartmoor soon. I don't know if there's any left. I had some lovely books at the Hen Shop in Avebury. Don't know if there's any left. I did have some at the Talking Tree in Glastonbury, if there's some left. I think the best thing to do, and the way to get a signed copy, the Holy Grail, is to, on my social media, so on Instagram, author Helen JR Bruce, or on Facebook, Heat of the Hunt Trilogy, drop me a little message, and then what I do, I use the post system. I magically pop a book with a little signature in a parcel, and it goes to your house. Open it, and it's there. So that is the best way. I did used to sell them on the A place, the online place beginning with A, but I don't know whether you discovered the amount of money it costs to do this activity means selling either the book for such a high, silly, crazy price, or selling the book at a loss.
Yeah, I think everybody thinks authors make lots of money, but I think I get about 68p a book for my new paperback or something ridiculous. So yeah, selling in person is much more remunerative. Right, thank you very much, and Helen, and thank you everyone for listening to the new podcast. So if things go well, I might make it more frequent. If you've enjoyed it, please leave a review, wherever you've listened to it, and please tell your book-loving friends. Next time, I hope I'll be interviewing multi-genre author Fanny Garstang. Thank you very much, Helen.
Pleasure.
There are stories galore in volumes by the score on every subject throughout history.